Social media can feel so overwhelming and really frustrating. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit different about social media and content, specifically around evergreen content. Now, this is a continuation of our summer social series, but we're kind of moving away from the standard social media that we've been talking about. This week, we are talking about an app that allows you as a content creator to be able to showcase your evergreen content in quick tip form that automatically hyperlinks to your episodes. That is awesome. And the way that it's set up is not just around, what is the latest episode or what are the latest tips or having to feed this algorithmic beast. It is about, do you have a tip that is helpful for this audience? Great, we're going to share it. And it allows you to show up regularly without having to keep showing up. And there are ways to cross promote over onto social media as well. Pretty much this app I'm obsessed with. We have the founder and creator of it here today. Mark is going to be sharing all about his app, Brain Bump. Please join me in welcoming Mark to the podcast. Hello, Mark. I am so excited to have you on the show today. If you could start by telling everyone who you are and what you do.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Herschberg, and I do three different things. I have three different brands. We're going to focus mostly on one of them. I am a CTO, CPO, Chief Technology Officer, Chief Product Officer. I build tech startup companies, sometimes as an employee, sometimes as a fractional executive, sometimes as a consultant. But then I've also been teaching at MIT for over 20 years, and that's a course on professional development, leadership, networking, negotiating, communication, all the skills we never teach people. We said, maybe we should be teaching people. And having done that, I wound up writing the book, The Career Toolkit, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You. So my second brand is as an instructor in this topic. I am not a coach. I very explicitly don't coach, but I do promote these ideas. I go on podcasts to talk about it. I have a blog. I do corporate speaking on it. And then having spent time promoting content, I saw there was a problem with how we share content, with how we consume content. And being a technologist, I said, well, I think I can solve this problem. And I created the Brain Bump app. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. But the Brain Bump app is a tool for a new type of content consumption.
So we're not talking social media. And yes, this is part of our summer social series, but I want to kind of diverge a little bit, get away from that, because social media can feel really overwhelming and really frustrating. And I think that what you've created, especially for those of us that are creating evergreen content, meaning anyone can listen to it at any time and get tons of value, that it is still a really valuable tool. So give us the breakdown of how it works for the creators as well as the consumers.
Actually, let's start, if I may, with why social media had limitations for those of us creating evergreen content. Now, I say evergreen. If you're talking about the news, social media, that's fantastic. But when you are talking about an evergreen topic, leadership is one of mine. It might be parenting, relationships, some type of self-development. It's not that your advice is that different this year from 10 years ago or 10 years from now. There's timeless advice. And if you think about how social media works, I say social media, but it's also email, if you have an email list, even podcasts, all these channels are ordered chronologically. Someone following you on social media, what happens? Let's say you put out a leadership tip. Say, okay, here's my advice of the day. Here's my leadership tip. Well, half your audience doesn't see it because they're not on social media that day. And even the ones who do might say, yeah, that's great advice. I don't disagree with it. But that's not my problem. My problem right now is I have to get more customers and I have to hire more people. And then I'll have people to lead and then I'll have a leadership problem. And by the time they get there, it's 6 or 12 months down the road. Are they going to say, wait, I think I saw something 6 months ago. Let me scroll back through the social media feed. Let me look through my emails from 6 months ago that, well, of course, I don't delete spam. I save it all just in case. They're not going to see it. They're not going to look at, if you have 100 episodes, let me try to go through all your old episodes. All these are ordered chronologically, but your advice is not chronological. Your advice is timeless. And so that's a limitation we have with these channels. And if you're promoting on the channel, as I think you probably talked about in some of your other episodes, you constantly have to feed the beast. If you haven't posted in a week or two, your audience starts to say, is she still active? Is this still good? I'm going to focus my attention elsewhere. So
Yeah.
that's the problem with social media. And we need to change how we deliver our content.
Yeah, that's so important. And I think that that's something that we can feel really frustrated about as content creators, right? And small business owners. Like, let's be real. Most of us, it's just us. Maybe we have one other person that's helping us come up with content, but we don't have the finances or resources or the time to spend all day, every day on social media, consistently coming up with content. I remember recently seeing Gary Vaynerchuk, love him, hate him, whatever your opinion is. He was talking to this brand that was like, I want to make an impact in the world. And he said, how many times are you posting on social media? And they were like, once a week. He's like, you're not going to make an impact on social media by posting once a week. That is not how you're going to change the world. And when you hear things like that, it's like, but what about me? Like, I know I have so much value and I know I have so much content that is really going to change somebody's life and make a difference for them, but it's not being seen. And I'm only one person. And it turns into this spiral for a lot of us. And that's why I love this idea of Brain Bump and like having this place outside of social media where people can find content no matter when it was created. So let's get into all of that.
Brain Bump is a completely free app, free for everyone. And what it does, it takes content from books, blogs, podcasts, classes, talks, conferences, and it takes the key ideas, continually recycling them to the audience so you always get relevant information when and where it matters. Okay, how do we do this? The content creator puts in the key tips or takeaway. If it's a book, imagine going through a book and just highlighting, this is important. Yeah, but want to remember this, all those highlights. For a podcast, you probably already have, here's the audio clip. Here's the quote. You're probably already doing this. You've got the content. But again, the delivery mechanism, you're putting that on social media where it just disappears. So we say, put that into the platform. And it goes into the platform. The content creators go to our server on the back end to put in, here's the key ideas from this episode or this book or this talk or whatever the content is. They are tagged by topic. Just think hashtags. This one's on leadership. This one's on women in leadership. This one is parenting tweens. Whatever that hashtag would be, we have that concept. So now you've got all your tips uploaded for your content. So for your podcast, here's hundreds of tips across all your episodes, or here's all the tips from a book. The app user, they can download the app for free from the App Store. And then they say, I want the tips from your podcast or her talk or his blog or whatever content set or sets they choose to add. Think of it like a Kindle. They can just pull in more and more sets, but it's tips. It's not the full book or the full episode. And now they have all the tips and they're going to use it one of two ways. There is a just-in-time mechanism. So, for example, there are some great networking tips in my book. Where do you read them? Sitting at home. Where do you need them? 2 months later when you're at a conference.
Yeah.
So now imagine you're at the conference. You're not carrying my book with you, but you've got my tips in the Brain Bump app. So as you're in the lobby, you're about to go into the conference, you pull out the app, you open it up, and you tap networking. Because remember, they're all tagged by topic. So you say networking, and there's all the networking tips. They're right at your fingertips. You flip through them. Here's good icebreaker questions. Here's where to stand to meet someone. Here's how I exit a conversation. Great. This is exactly what I need. And it's there top of mind for you. The other mode, and by the way, we have favorites as well. So you can have your favorite. Here's my favorite networking tips, whatever you want to do. The other mode is, think of it like a daily affirmation. But instead of just some generic platitude, it's your advice. So for example, if I'm a new manager, I might want a management tip at 8:55 a.m. each day. So right as I go into the office, I don't even have to open the app. I just get a little pop-up on my phone. Oh, look, hey, there's a good tip. Okay, yep, remember to do that, swipe. And by seeing it over and over, we know spaced repetition is how people remember it. So
Yeah.
you might say, I want my management advice, 8:55 every day. I've got a strategy meeting at 3 p.m. Wednesdays, so I want to get that tip 2:55 just Wednesdays. And my wife is complaining that I'm not present in the marriage, so I want to get a marriage tip at 6 o'clock every day, right before I walk in the door. The point is you control what you need. I think of it as pull media. Social media and email, it's push. We just throw it out. Hopefully it lands somewhere. But now we're giving the audience the opportunity to say, I'm going to pull what's relevant to me when and where it's relevant. And by doing this, the content always resonates. It's always a hit because they're going to ignore my interview advice because they're not interviewing for a job, but they're going to get the networking advice because that's what they need. Now, each tip, when it's shown on the app, it's not just the tip. It's shown with your cover image. It's shown with the title. It's shown the title of your podcast, the title of your episode, and these are all hyperlinked. So the great thing is not only are they seeing your brand over and over, it's like, oh, I get such great advice. Every day I'm getting great advice from this podcast, from this brand. I say, well, that's a really good piece of advice, but I want to go deeper. They can click the hyperlink and go to the podcast episode or go to the article if it's a blog or go to the talk if it's a talk on YouTube. And so we can drive traffic to your evergreen content. Now, I mentioned before with social media, you have to feed the beast. You have to post every day. The great thing here is that once you post, you're done. So my book, for example, I upload all the tips from my book. I never go back. I don't have to say, oh, I have to do something again. But there are literally thousands of people who every day are looking at tips from my book because it just gives them to them over and over again. Now, with a podcast, okay, if you have a new episode, take another 30 seconds after you set up your social media, take another 30 seconds, just drop the same clips, drop that quote over the platform. But again, it will get continually recycled over and over. And even if your podcast goes off the air, if you say, you know what, I'm done, this is good enough, people can still download those tips. People will still be getting them. People will still see your brand, even when you're no longer actively promoting it.
I'm so glad that you mentioned, okay, this is how it would work for someone like a book, right? You have something that's not really going to change unless you do extra additions or things like that versus someone who's continuously coming up with content. And I'm curious here for someone who maybe has more guests on their show or has more solo episodes. In my head, I'm thinking I'd recommend that you, especially if for your brand, you would want to make sure that it's things that you have said as the host, insightful things. So that way it drives people more to you than to the podcast in general. But what are your thoughts? Do you have any type of like, I'm thinking like Instagram has their collaborative posts where you can kind of cross promote between people, or what does that look like?
Great question. We have it tied first to your brand. I get questions sometimes where people say, well, I've been a guest on a lot of podcasts. Can I put that there? And we're not designed for that for two reasons. First, we associate, the episodes are all associated. The tips are associated with episodes associated with the podcast. And so if you've been on 20 different podcasts, we don't have a way to say, well, this podcast goes here and this one goes there. But it's also about, we respect the owner of the IP. So you might be familiar with the book summary apps. There's a lot of them out there. There are a dime a dozen. And I know the authors hate it because the authors say these people, they don't ask my permission. Legally, they don't need it. And they summarize my book. And half the time, that's not right. That's not what I'm trying to say. You're hurting my brand by claiming this is what I'm trying to say. And they have the total control, this third party. So we will never put an author's book on there unless the author says, yes, I want my book there. And here's what I want to say. We want to give you control because the podcast host owns the IP. We say, look, you have the control. You decide what goes in, what does not go in. But I would say it's okay to, whether it's here's something I say on the podcast in a solo episode or even with a guest, here's something my guest said. Now, I still, if you quote a guest, I'd say, when you share that tip, put the guest's name there.
Right.
It's nice to do. But people, when they see it, so they'll see Jane Smith said this, but they'll also see your podcast name, your podcast cover art, your podcast title, and it links there. So you still get the brand credit because you're the person delivering this idea. Let's face it, the parenting advice, the leadership advice, whatever you do, you're probably not the most unique person on that advice. We're not, oh, here's what I know that no one else in the world knows. Right. I learned it from someone else anyway. I just might not know who taught it to me years ago. So it's okay to quote other people's content if it was on your episode and you're going to still get the credit.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So we're talking a lot about like podcast episodes. What about other types of content? So if you maybe have a video series or you have a blog series or maybe you go live every week and you want to pull some really insightful things from that, how can you use it in those ways as well?
As I said, works for all sorts of content. Now, the simplest, I mentioned a book. Books, you can imagine, we don't have a link to an episode. There's just a single link to the book page. When you get to a blog or podcast, then you'll have that article or that episode link. You could take a newsletter. What's the difference between a newsletter and a blog? It's basically just if you're delivering it in email or if it's going up on a website. So you can use that for a newsletter. If you do a video series, what's the difference between a video series and a podcast? Not really much of one. It's mostly naming. So you could
Right.
use the podcast for your video series. We also have talks and classes. So talks, some people say I have just one talk or I might have three talks. So I'll have three different content sets, three different sets of tips. Other people will say, well, I have just one set of my tip talks. I might have three or four talks, but I'm just going to put them all together. In fact, one of the tags you might use is talk A, talk B, talk C, talk D is how they can sort and find it, in addition to whatever other leadership or whatever topics you might be talking about. And then for classes, it's very similar. A class is similar to a podcast,
Mhm.
except you might have a little bit of this is episode, what would be equivalent of like episode one. We only have the names for a podcast, but you might have class one, class two. Now that also works for conferences and events because you can imagine people at the event are saying, wow, there's so much here. I know when I go to a conference, it's the fire hose. You're just learning,
Yes.
learning, learning. And then you go back to the office, go, wow, there's so much to learn. Oh, but now there's 17 things that piled up on my desk. I don't have time to think about it. It gets pushed to the side and you forget it. And so this can work well for that type of event. And by the way, there is a really great way this can be shared. Talks and conferences are my favorite, but you can use this any different way. We have a unique way of using QR codes. So each book or podcast or blog or whatever content set it is has a unique URL and QR code. And this QR code, when I do a talk, the final slide, the one where I say, thank you so much, here's my contact information. Say, do you want to remember everything you just learned this past hour? You should get lots of nods. And if you're a speaker, by the way, people always want your slides, but you may not want to give out your slides. You're like, well,
Right.
this is my IP. I don't want to see it on the internet. Say, do you want to learn? Do you want to remember everything you just learned? See that QR code. Here's what you do. Snap that QR code with your phone. That's going to take you to a page and click Apple or Android and go to the store and download a free app. And now that you have it downloaded with the app, scan that same QR code a second time. Now, the first time, if you and I each have our own QR code, you for your podcast, me for my book, the first time anyone scans it, it's going to take them to that same go download the app. But now when they scan it with the app, it will add the tips from my book to their app. It will add the tips from your podcast or your talk to their app. And it sets up by default that automatic daily reminder. So with just a few clicks, it takes less than 7 seconds. They can install as they're looking at your talk. They go, great, I want to remember all this. Boom, now it's in my pocket. And that QR code or that link, you can also use in show notes. You can use in social media. You can use in email. You can use on your website. You can put all over the place. And it's going to help people get your content easily. And it helps you stay sticky.
I love this so much. Just like you guys, if you can see me, I'm like nodding. But for the listeners, you can't see me. I am nodding over here. I think that there are so many great ways, and you've thought of everything that people could use this for. And even I'm thinking about like if you do workshops, right? So a lot of the business owners that I tend to interact with, they do workshops and they have great information in these workshops. And sometimes even a workshop can feel like a fire hose. So how can you take, all right, here, you're on my slide, we're doing this live, or you're on the replay, take your phone out, scan this, or here's the link, let's go. Like, you can have all these tips easily accessible to you. So we're creating this content, we're getting it onto Brain Bump. What are some of the kind of tracking tools that we can use on there? Are there like this many people are subscribed to you? Or, like, do you use the word subscribe? How does that really work?
Sure. Let me name one other feature and then I'll talk
Yes.
about the metrics because we'll mention this feature. One of my favorite features on the app, we have a social share feature. Now, lots of websites and tools have that social share button. I think they do a terrible job of it. And we know people like to share quotes, but probably they're not going to even mention who the quote came from. If you're
Right.
lucky, maybe they mention your name. They're not going to mention your podcast or your URL or anything. So on the social share in the app, if I as an app user, I'm scrolling through these tips or one came up today, go, wow, what a great tip. I want to share this with my audience. They click the share button. We have, it's like a mini Canva. We're not certainly as broad as that, but it will bring up something. They can select the size. Do you want landscape or portrait? And we have it, the preset sizes for the different social media channels. They can then set the font type, the font size, change the colors to make it lay out pretty. But the whole time, not only will it show the quote, it will show the title of the podcast, the title of the host, and the cover image. Your cover image and your title are always there. So whenever it gets shared, your brand is shared along with your quote. And if the podcast host or author or speaker has given us on the platform your social media handles, then the person sharing can tag you. So what this means is when I share your quote, I go, wow, what a great quote from your podcast episode. I'm going to share this with my friends. And I do so, I will tag you. So now you can see you've been quoted and you can now engage in the conversation with my friends, my audience to help expand your reach. So it
Before
looks
we
like
get
that.
into that, yeah, no, now I have additional questions because I love this because a lot of what stops people from sharing, inspirational quotes or thoughtful quotes sometimes can be aesthetics. What does the font look like? What does the color look like? So I love that you have that baked in. And I'm even thinking about as a content creator, well, what am I going to post on social media today? There you go. What a great way to be like, here's something really smart that I said. Wow. Okay, cool. That is going up onto Instagram today. Or, like funneling that through your content to feed the beast, right? Like we can maximize this even as creators, not just as users.
You hit upon a really important use case, which is that, yes, you had to do a little work to get your tips into the platform, but once you've done it, these are your social media posts for the next year or so. You can also, if you're familiar with the 60-30-10 rule. Now,
Mm.
this rule says 60% of the time you share, here's my article, my interview, my stuff. 10% is selling. Buy my book, buy my course, buy whatever. We all understand that's what we're here for.
Yep.
But 30% should be a good netsis and promote someone else's content, reshare something from someone else, share someone else's article that's relevant to your brand and your audience. Well, this makes it easy because if I put out a lot of my own content and I'm thinking, I just need a parenting tip, that's not mine. I need to say something about parenting, not my stuff. You can go out and search, or you open the app and you just hit the parenting topic. And well, there's a bunch of parenting tips. Pick one, share. In seconds, you can promote your content or something else in your channel that's on brand. So it makes life very easy for you.
Plus, it connects you with that other person, right? So if you're like, if I'm a parenting person, say I've got a podcast about parenting and I grab something from another podcast that's about parenting or a book that's about parenting, I've just created a collaborative connection with someone else that I did not have that connection with before that I can then take to the next level. Hey, I would love to do a podcast swap with you. I'm loving the insights that I'm seeing from your content. Or I would love to, give away one of your book after you're on my podcast. I'd love to have you on and do a giveaway for your book. Like there's so many different ways that we can take this to make our lives more sociable, right? Like, yes, this summer social series, like let's be social, let's be collaborative. And I'm obsessed. I'm signing up. That's it.
That's a very good point because I might not feel comfortable reaching out to you like, hi, you don't know me. I want to
Right.
work with you. But when I share your content, because I can tag you, you're going to see it. And that starts it. And we do, by the way, have people who will say, oh, you and I write about the same topic. I'll share some of your posts. You share some of mine. I'll even tell my audience, because I've already told them 6 times, get my tips on Brain Bump. And you've said to your audience, get your tips on Brain Bump. Let's just cross promote, because it doesn't hurt. We're not asking them to buy someone else's book, which might be your book instead of mine. They can add as much content as they want, so we can cross promote. And so it's very easy to find collaborators who do this. You asked about metrics. So on the back end, we track a number of metrics. Now, first, I want to note, I mentioned one of my personal brands. I'm a CTO, and I work a lot in cybersecurity. I very much respect privacy. And one thing that I found is people, when I was doing research, people don't like to sign up for email lists these days, because we all know, oh, great, I'm going to sign up. You're going to spam me with email. I don't want this. And so we've seen a fall off in that. The balance that we have, an app user, they can download the app for free. We don't charge anyone anything. They don't even have to register. They can just anonymously add your content, get your tips. They will need to register. We do have an option that if you're an app user and we don't yet have the podcast you love, the book that you like, and you want to add your own tips, so they can add it manually, or they can import Kindle highlights. Well, they do have to create an account for that, because we have to know which tips are yours and which tips are hers. We don't, however, at this time share it, but we give the content creators, the podcasters and others, the ability to put in lead magnets. So there's typically 2 people have. One is get my 50 free tips or get my free thing, and you put in the link to that and what is my get this. And that, of course, you're doing an email sign up. Also, we give the content creators the option to put a scheduling link. Get a free 30-minute consultation with me. Here's my scheduling link. And so you can put those into your profile and people will effectively opt in. And of course, you're capturing their information that way. So that's how we're finding the balance, protecting information that we know consumers want, but giving you some access. But what metrics we do track, if you're a content creator on the back end, you're going to see how many people are installing or uninstalling your content. Uninstalls are pretty rare. We do see a lot of installs. And you can track it. So if you do mention on a podcast or do an email blast or social media post, you can see how did that do, because you'll see over the next few days, presumably your installs will spike. We show you as well how many times people have clicked links to go to your website or to go to episodes. And then at the individual tip level, I think this is what's really useful. Each tip, we track how often that tip has been favorited or how often that tip has been shared on social media. So this is going to give you deep insights, not just broadly what people are liking. You already know this episode was more popular than that one. But you see, well, this tip, this point, and because they have their topics with them, those hashtags, you might notice, my most popular tips are all about this topic. I should do more episodes or articles or talks on this topic. So it's very insightful at a granular level, and you can log in anytime to see it. We also send you, we don't spam you, but optionally you can get a once a month report that just says, hey, here's the metrics for how your content did in the last 30 days.
I love that so much. And you are speaking my language. Use the data to make better decisions, not just as business owners, but as creators. We spend so much effort coming up with, oh my goodness, I don't know what my audience wants because social media doesn't tell me anything. This is a great way to be able to see what are people interested in? Where can you go deeper with your content and really stand out instead of doing the fluff, right? Like really be able to show up better for your audience. And it sounds very similar to kind of like what YouTube does with their creator program of, hey, here's how your videos did this month, general ideas, and then you can go in and dig a little deeper. I love that so much. Now, is there anything else that we need to talk about Brain Bump before we get into this awesome resource that you have after being a guest on over 400 episodes? That is a lot.
I'll just say with Brain Bump, it is completely free for everyone. We do not charge people. We do not sell ads. We do not collect data, let alone sell data. I put this out to help make the world better. Now, we have begun. We've got a lot of content already. Most of it I would describe as business content. That's anything from leadership to marketing to entrepreneurship to finance. We want, and the reason for that is I said, let me start with one category. You don't want to start where someone says, well, here's one on raising pets, and here's one on relationships, and here's one on marketing, and this is all over the place. But we are expanding into other categories. So even if you look and say, well, I don't see my type of stuff there, well, great. We probably want your stuff. And in fact, the default sort, when someone first loads it up, no, they can sort by alphabetical, reverse alphabetical, all sorts of things. But the default sort is always newest because this will incentivize people to get their content on there earlier. As we grow more, we're going to add categories. The way to think of it, Amazon, if you look at their interface today, would have been overkill for Amazon 1997. But Amazon 1997, that interface doesn't work today. And so it's the same thing. We have a very simple interface and we're mostly in one category, but we'll start to make it a little more complex and more categories. But if you are in this newer category, and we'll even have subcategories, you might be the first. So come on sooner, because for the rest of time, the default sort will always show you as the first or second or third. So you definitely want to get on sooner, and it's all completely free.
What you've created, I think, is so impactful, and it's such a smart way to be able to support creators. I mean, we are, like I said, we're coming up with so much content constantly, and it can feel really overwhelming and frustrating because obviously social media, you got to feed the algorithm. And so I love that you've created this to be able to support people in this really awesome way, and that you do care about not just the creators, but the users and their, security as well. I think it's so important. So you have been a guest on over 400 episodes. I think I'm probably at the 400 mark with the amount of guest episodes and podcast episodes since I've been podcasting since 2018. I'm probably at that point now, but 400 is so much. How, I know you have a whole series on what to do, what not to do, what you've seen work, what's not worked. But if you could give us one top tip to take away from the lessons learned from 400 episodes, what would it be?
Because we have a lot of hosts listening, here's what I've learned. Now, we know that the podcast, first and foremost, it is about providing value to the audience. Yes, you probably have something you want to sell or promote. And yes, your guest probably has something she wants to sell or promote, and that's fine. But first and foremost, it is how do we deliver value to the audience? I hate people who say, well, I've got 5 secrets of marketing. And if you buy my book, I'll tell you what they are, but we're not going to talk about the 5 on the show, just that there are 5 and you can find them in my book. So share, hey, secret number 1 is optimize your website for SEO. It's not that big a secret already.
Right.
You're not giving away the store. Now, the examples of here's how you did it for this website or here's how this business used it, those are the details people are coming back for. So deliver value to your audience first. But to do that, here's something that I really am surprised more hosts don't do this. You have the guest intake form. You say, tell me about you. Tell me your social links. Tell me this. Tell me your background. Tell me questions to ask you. Tell me what the audience will get. And that's totally fine and good. You're saying, I want to make sure you're aligned. But then we show up and I know, okay, you have a podcast and it's small business marketing. Okay, great. I have some idea. We're not talking about parenting, but small business marketing, is that US based? Are you mostly US and Europe? Are you global? When you say small business, is it mostly solopreneurs? Is it companies 5 to 50 people? Is it companies 500 people and less? Because if most of your companies are 100 to 500 people, that's a very different set of tips, or the examples I might bring up are different than those for a sole proprietorship. So if you can tell me anything about your audience, now, yes, sometimes you only know, well, here's my male, female, here's general age range, and here's the geography. We know you don't always have a lot of details, but even if you can say, here's my archetype, here's who I think about as the audience, the more you can share about who your audience is and what they're looking for, a good guest, now all guests should be asking this question, but most don't. But if you can just make it part of your share and say, here's who you're speaking to, Likewise, there's just a couple other things that are helpful. And this, by the way, can all be in if you have that automated email flow, register here and then schedule a time and you send the like, hey, reminder and remember to wear headphones type of thing. Just put in, here's the audience, here's the information, here's what they're looking for, and three other things that's really useful for a guest. Are you audio or video? It's not always obvious. And
Right.
some people, especially, oh, if you're video, I need to do hair and makeup and lighting. If you're audio, great, t-shirt.
Right.
So let people know ahead of time, are you audio or video? Or it might be, we do video clips. We're audio only, but we're going to take video. Okay, I still need hair and makeup. Let us know the level of editing. And that's typically either single take, like unless someone dies during the show, we just keep going. It might be, well, we'll take out if a dog starts barking halfway through or there's a big disruption, we can cut it out. But otherwise, don't expect much. Your disfluencies, we're just going to leave those in. Or it might be, yes, we have full editing. So just letting us know, because that as well tells me if I get lost in an answer, do I just say, I'm going to take it from the top and just go because you'll edit out, or to say, okay, well, I'm already halfway down this path. Let me just keep going. So knowing those two things. And the third, timing. And again, we can usually get this by doing our research and looking over, but you never know when someone says, I usually do this, but I can go up to this, or I have a hard stop or whatever. Just gives us an overall sense. One other small pet peeve as a guest, when there's a call to action, which there usually is for a guest, please say it in the podcast. So many people say, we'll put the website in the show notes. And yes, please do. We appreciate it. But remember, so many people listen to a podcast when they're driving, when they're at the gym, they're jogging, they're on the subway, they're in a place where they are not going to naturally look at the show notes next. So they might be in the show notes, but people aren't going to see them. So say it and then put it in the show notes both.
Yes. I'm so glad that you said all of those and that I also did all those with this conversation. Like before we got started, I said, hey, this is the editing level. This is the amount of time we're going to be on here. This is the audience and what they're looking for. And these are things that I mentally am like, checklist. I need to go make sure that I have those in that form ahead of time, right? Or those emails ahead of time that I can bring ease to the guest of like, all right, I feel prepared. I know exactly how I'm coming rather than waiting till the beginning. So that is a really great reminder and something that I'm going to go and change right now after we're done with this, but after I sign up for Brain Bump, of course. So with that in mind, where can people learn more about Brain Bump, learn more about you? Obviously, we'll have the links in the show notes, but let's make sure that we get those as well.
Wonderful. And this is why you are a podcasting expert people should turn to, because you know to do these things. I'm going to name a couple websites. First, for those curious about my book and that aspect of my life, thecareertoolkitbook.com. For Brain Bump. Now, you can find Brain Bump on both of the app stores, but if you go to brainbumpapp.com, that's brainbumpapp.com, on that website, you'll see a quick video that shows how the app works. There are links to take you to the App Store. There's instructions and FAQ, and there is a form at the bottom, or if you look at the top menu, see the link for content creators. If you're interested in getting your content on BrainBump, go to brainbumpapp.com and just fill out that form, 30 seconds, say, here's my name, my website, my contact, here's a good time to reach me, and we will get in touch with you because we are trying to get more content. The way I think of it, it's like stone soup. The more content that comes on, the more people show up and say there's more good stuff. That means there's a larger audience for you to pull from. So it is a virtuous cycle, and we're always looking for more content. So all that is at brainbumpapp.com. And then we mentioned the podcasting articles. I have another website, Cognosco Media. I never thought that would be public, so I picked a word people probably can't spell. COGNOSCO media.com, cognoscomedia.com. And if you go there in the menu, you'll see Podcast Alchemy. And that's where I have 10 articles on everything from how to find lots of guests or how to pitch lots of podcasts, how to create a good pitch, how to be a good guest, lots of tips to be more effective, how to be a good host. We talked about a few tips from there, how to get the most out of your podcast, different business models to think about, all that, Cognosco Media, Podcast Alchemy. But the big site to go to, brainbumpapp.com.
Awesome. Mark, this has been so incredible. Thank you so much for being on and sharing all of this wonderfulness with us today.
Thanks for having me on the show.